here with Brian Blake, MD of DB
Managing Director,
Breweries.
yeah.
And we've just been through the Business Intelligence Workshop set up by Unlimited. And so the focus is on leadership, and I've got a few questions for you, given your excellent leadership over the last while, especially with DB Breweries going through a lot of change in the past few years.
A lot of challenges.
So firstly, straight off the bat, you mentioned during your talk this perfect storm that has happened within DB. What was that?
Well, basically we'd had years of sustainable growth, very, very profitable organisation, and we suddenly hit a period, we had the recession, which we had drinkers basically trading down from premium brands to mainstream to savings brands. So we were selling the same amount of beer, but our margins were knocked around. At the same time as that was happening, we had a huge swing from people drinking in pubs to people drinking in the supermarket, buying beer in supermarkets and through the key retail stores. And the problem with that is that you can buy product through those stores a lot cheaper than you can on-premise. So the on-premise guys suddenly saw this mass exodus of people that were suddenly buying cheaper alcohol, drinking at home, buying cheap pizzas, watching high-definition television, and being very conscious about where they were spending their money. The breweries actually have quite an investment in those pubs by way of trade advances, so a lot of those trade advances came under pressure. So we also had stress loans. We were similar to the banks in that respect. So we had people trading down, we had pressure on loans, and then we had other things hit us. We had raw material costs that increased significantly. We had one of our major customers that we had a major dispute with. So we didn't just have the recession, we basically had what we called the perfect storm. We had all these things hit us at once. So we, after years of profit growth, our profit plunged, and we had a profit crisis on our hands, which we had to manage our way out of.
So what was yours and the organisation's view on leadership before this? Because you guys were turning over outstanding growth, and then if we could follow that up, what was your view of leadership after?
Yeah, well, I suppose DB had been built on a culture of participative management. That's my style, and we'd built our culture on that basis, so there'd been a contribution across the company to the success that we'd had. What it required from me, first and foremost, was a change in style. I mean, we had to go very quickly into command and control, particularly to get costs out of the business. You know, we had to reduce our headcount, we had to cut expenses. There was a whole lot of decisions we had to make, including taking credit cards out of the company, which was one of the interesting ones. You know, we took 150 credit cards out, including my own, and that had an interesting impact on expenses, but it was also interesting in terms of the impact it had on the organisation, because there's a lot of things that staff will accept, but that was a good example of where, for example, some staff would say, well, hang on, I've always spent the company's money in the right way, I've always had supporting documentation, why are you punishing me? So, you know, whereas we would have had discussions about those things before, basically as the MD, I basically had to say, let's get on to make these decisions and do these things.
How important was it, you mentioned during the talk that your own credit card was cut, and how important was it for you to go to that level to demonstrate to everyone else?
I think, you know, the culture of our organisation was such that if I'd expected the staff to suffer and me not share the hurt, then that would not have been acceptable. You know, no one got a salary increase from the MD down, no one got a bonus from the MD down, everyone lost their credit card from the MD down. The hurt was felt across the organisation, and that was really, really important for the culture of the company.
And also, on the back of this, you mentioned you spent 2 weeks touring New Zealand. Why did you do that?
Well, one of the strengths of DB is that we communicate very effectively with our staff. So when a crisis comes, it's even more important that you communicate to staff. So I upped the level of communication. Spent 2 weeks travelling around the country talking to staff, saying what were the factors that had driven our profit down, what were the reasons, and they were logical things. They weren't systemic as such. What we were doing about it, and painting a view of the future, because I think it's quite important. You know, you also have to start to prepare your organisation for the post-crisis situation. So, you know, we took 10% of our people out, but I also had to give the other 90% an assurance that DB had a really bright future, and that we were going through some short-term hurt, but once we got through that, the company would always be different than it was, but it had great prospects. You know, that DB was going to once again be a very profitable company.
And you discussed, whilst in this perfect storm, you were pulling back on the credit cards, you stopped recruiting, you had 10% cuts across the board, and then you mentioned that you accelerated some of the sales and marketing. You released 2 new products, Tui Blonde and a push into the cider market.
Yeah.
How did you justify and manage that? You know those two parallels. Here we're shrinking, here we're growing.
Well, I don't think it's a sequential process that you go through.
Yeah.
You know, you need plenty of balls in the air, and as quickly as you're taking costs out of the business, you need to be looking for the opportunities in the marketplace. So what do? You take costs out and you accelerate the income opportunities, and we did that by launching those 2 new products. They were in the pipeline anyway. We did them slightly quicker than we had anticipated. We put a lot of effort behind them, and they were both successful. And there are other what I call incremental revenue opportunities. I mean, we do a little bit of contract packing of beer for Australia. We do soft drinks. We accelerated some of our efforts in those areas. So you've got to get through the crisis. So you've got to stop the rot. You've got to prop your profit up, and then you've got to get back into growth again.
Excellent. You talk a little bit about a participative leadership, and then you were talking about looking after your people during the emergency phase and the adaptive phase. How did these work hand in hand?
Well, you have to get people to accept that you have a crisis.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first thing. You know, some people naturally think, well, this is a short-term thing. So you have to outline to your people the fact that this is a crisis. So that's the emergency phase. And you create urgency through action. You know, you show the people that things have to be done, and they have to be done very quickly. What you have to be careful of, though, is that you have to pull out of that phase at some stage. There's a point where you have to say, if I carry on in this mode, I'm actually going to do damage. You know? So we reached a point where my instinct told me we had to go, and those are my terms, by the way, emergency and adaptive, what I call the adaptive phase. We had to get back to what we were doing before. We had to adapt the organisation. So we had to send signals to the organisation that we were through the rough parts and things were coming right again, basically to give people confidence. And we did some simple things. We simply had a great party at the brewery where, you know, we had a band and we said, we're through it, let's celebrate the fact that we're through it. We did some unusual things, like we did our culture survey, which, you know, a lot of people would say, well, that's a dangerous time to do a culture survey. The results weren't as good as they've previously been, but they weren't as bad as we expected, considering the actions we'd taken. We did some leadership surveys. We did a whole lot of things that sent signals to the organisation that, wow, things are changing again and we're coming out of the phase that we're in. Because you have to give people hope, you know, you have to give people hope that we're back into a profitable situation again.
Excellent. And on a final note, what kind of tips do you have for other fellow Kiwi CEOs who are in a similar position?
I think business changes very, very quickly these days, and you have to respond very, very quickly to the situation you find yourself in. You know, you can be in a business has sustainable profit growth, or you think you've got sustainable profit growth. You hit the wall as we did, then you have to change course very, very quickly, and you have to adapt very, very quickly. So if you're slow to adapt, then you'll suffer the consequences. But if you believe you have robust strategies overall and you have a very strong culture, then you need to have the confidence to make those hard decisions to get